Hey guys, what is up? Super K-Man Rocks here, and we are back for my LCK week number 2 overview and analysis video here in the spring split. I'm sorry that this video is coming out a little bit later than normal. I said this earlier on in the week. If you didn't watch the LPL video, obviously no pressure to go and watch that, but I explained there that I was on the LPL English broadcast this week, and so a couple of these videos had to get pushed back a day. Unfortunately, that applied to the LCK video, so it's coming out after the first day of games have happened in week number 3, but we're going to be covering week number 2 on the channel all the same. I hope you guys are still excited. I know I am. Still a lot to talk about, even though we did have some results. I'm not going to be talking about those in today's video. That will be saved for next week. We will be attempting to just go through everything that happened in week number 2 as per normal. So again, apologies for this coming out a day late, but we're definitely still going to go over everything, and I'm still very excited. Hope you guys are as well. If you are, let me know down in the comments section below. Always curious to know where you guys are landing when it comes to a lot of these players and a lot of these teams. But without further ado, let's get into the video itself, shall we? If you are new to the channel, what we're going to do is go series by series, talking about the advantages and disadvantages that each team was able to generate. I'll be giving a player of the series and a dud of the series for each series that we cover, and at the end of the video, I will be giving a player of the week and a dud of the week to tie everything into a nice, neat little bow. We will be updating my personal power rankings from number 1 to number 10 at the end as well, talking about, the direction that these teams are heading in, but for the most part, we will spend most of this video talking about the series themselves. So, without further ado, let's jump into day number 1, and we kicked day 1 off with a matchup that on paper looked like it was going to be pretty easy to predict, but was actually a little bit closer than maybe we anticipated. It was the DN Freecs taking on Hanwha Life esports, and HLE is going to be able to get the job done. If they had lost this series, that would have been a gigantic upset. DNF right now looks like the worst team in the LCK, but HLE is able to lock in. They get Zeka on Akali in game number 3, and all negative feelings, all negative emotions end up washing away into the abyss as they dominate that third and final game. But credit to DNF, they actually did step up in game number 2, and quite frankly, they just outplayed HLE. Dudu in particular had a fantastic series, a fantastic game number 2 on the Ambessa, and even Pioshik, I think, played well for maybe the first time this entire year, but we'll talk about that when we get to the DNF section. We start with HLE here, some good and some bad, but come on, how do you not start this conversation with the player of the series? That, of course, being Zeka in the mid lane. When you need this guy to step up, he is going to be there to step up. Don't give him Akali. Like, I don't mean to spoil the scouting report for Hanwha Life esports, but maybe don't give him his best champion by a large margin. Sometimes we just forget how good he is on things like Akali and Sylas because he never is allowed to play them at the LCK level, and so we see him on Azir and on Ryze and on Talia and all these other champions every week, and we're like, he's a really good player, but is he like a top 5 player in the world caliber talent? And then he actually gets to play his favorite champions for the first time all year long, and you're just like, oh yeah, like that's, him on Akali, that might be the number 1 player in the world. Like, genuinely, I don't know how you stop Zeka when he's on his comfort picks. It's genuinely unfair, and obviously Bulldog's not the biggest competition in the world, but it's just like, it's ridiculous. His mechanical ceiling is so much higher than everybody else's when he does get to be on comfort picks, and that's not to take anything away from how he played the rest of this series. He was awesome on Azir in game number 1. He's even pretty decent on the Ryze in game number 2. Him and Peanut have great synergy together, and I think they played off of each other very well throughout this series, as they basically always have, and I think that's the other player that I want to shout out. Peanut was very good in this series. Poor guy is getting his Nidalee win rate tanked by Zeus inting on the top side, which again, we will talk about moving forward, but the Vi was awesome in game 3. The Xin Zhao was pretty solid in game number 1. Pioshik, again, has not been the most difficult threat to try and take down. The Nefiri was decently strong. They got the Gwen Nefiri in game number 1, and you're kind of sitting there worried that maybe HLE aren't taking them too seriously, but Peanut is able to completely outjungle the Nefiri. The Xin Zhao actually does look like a pretty decent counter in this particular instance. They draft the Poppy support to kind of turn that off as well, and things do end up working out. Delight is awesome. He's the best support in the world at the moment. I haven't really felt all that contested in saying that. I don't think there's anybody in the world that's even kind of close to the level that he's playing at right now. Obviously, I think that it's very possible that there are many supports that could get into that conversation, even players like Lehens and Keria at this level, and then obviously there are players in the LPL that I think can get there on, Kale has been excellent for anyone's legend, but Delight still is 1 of 1 right now, and he did prove that on the Poppy and the Alistar. Viper was solid, if just a little bit kind of invisible for a lot of this series. He certainly wasn't the main character when Zeka and Peanut started taking over, but if you gotta have a negative, it's once again Zeus on the top side. I'm going to continue to beat this point home because every single split, it's the same conversation surrounding Zeus, and I'm going to continue to say the same things over and over again until I stop getting comments in every single primer video that tell me that I'm ranking Zeus too low or that it's ridiculous that I give this guy an A- grade. Zeus's best games are A+, A worthy. It's not even close. He'll go through a playoff run and be the best best player in the entire playoffs. He'll be awesome at an international tournament or at Worlds or something like that, and everybody will forget that for large sections of regular seasons, he's just a bad player. Like, he just runs it because he's not locked in mentally and he's trying a lot of the crazy stuff. What was that game number 2 on the NAR? Like, actually abysmal stuff. And I know people are going to defend it a little bit because Zeus is a very popular player, but man, the under the hood stuff was even worse than I think the numbers would actually indicate. It just was not good from Zeus, and until he cleans up stuff like this, and remember, this is not the first time he's done this split. Their one loss earlier on to Gen.G, Zeus completely ran it in that series as well. Like, until he starts cleaning this up, he's an A- player. I'm sorry for all the people who go back, 8 months ago and comment on an off-season video that I made saying, you look real stupid for putting Zeus at A-. I don't know. I feel like it's aged pretty well. I feel like it will continue to age well. We know who he is at this point, and this is just who he is, but certainly it was enough for HLE to win. Zeka went God mode in game number 3, and it's really difficult to overcome that if you're DNF, who's one of the weaker teams, if not the weakest team in the entire league. This team has been on a crash course into the bottom of the standings for quite a long time now, and it's been basically everything. Pioshik is playing like the worst jungler in the entire league. Bulldog is unable to operate at a LCK level. He has gotten worse and worse and worse every single split he has played here. I can't even really begin to explain it. I know why it's happening. I've talked about why it's happening, but it's frustrating. He's going to get dead of the series here. And, for those of you who don't watch every bit of content that I make, the reason I'm so frustrated with Bulldog is that his rookie split was really solid. He was super aggressive as a primary carry option, and he was really open to playing a lot of assassins and really trying to be, a carry out of the mid lane. He didn't want to be a facilitator. He didn't want to be that shove and roam style of player, but it really does feel like the coaching staff in this org and on this team has instructed him to become a quote-unquote more versatile player, and in doing so, he's kind of lost that spark that ended up making him interesting as a 17-year-old in the LCK. He's no longer good in lane. He's no longer even surviving against the good mid laners, and it's not like he's a good facilitator. He's gotten better in that aspect, but it's come at the cost of his ability to actually dominate mechanically. It just feels like in an effort to become, a more versatile, well-rounded player, he's kind of killed the only thing that was really above average for him at the beginning, and it's made him a worse player overall. Not good stuff. Bulldog has had a horrible 2025 so far. But it's not just Bulldog. This is the first time where it really did feel like the bot lane was unplayable. Like, Berserker and Life were both bad in this series. Life was really bad last week. I think he was dud of the week for the entirety of the LCK in week number 1 for me. But this is the first time where I've looked at Berserker and been like, oh boy, this was not good. The Corki, the Misfortune, they were awful. Like, he was definitely in the running for dud of the series for me. He really was that bad. And Berserker, honestly, has been the only player on this team that I don't think has had the lows. And so, not a great sign there. Pioshik's game 2 was solid, but, his game 1 definitely was more the champion than it was him as a player, and he got completely out-jungled in game 3. Dudu was awesome, actually just gapped Zeus super hard in game number 2. Wasn't super relevant outside of that in this series. The Rumble and the Gwen weren't exactly ideal, but having one game where you look like a star against Hanwha Life is still fine by me. Unfortunately, the curse of Dudu is that he's only ever able to perform well when the rest of the team is bad. When the rest of the team is playing well, all of a sudden that means he has to turn off his own gameplay, which is obviously really frustrating. So, DNF is who they are. Maybe they're better than number 10, but there's a lot of competitive teams at the bottom of the standings, and this more so felt like HLE just running it, and Zeus in particular, just kind of running it until they got their groove back in game number 3. You opened Pandora's box, you allowed a Kali in that final game, and you really paid the price for it. Zeka is unreal talented on those comfort champions, and he proves it once again. Then moving on to our second series of day number 1, and it's a classic rivalry in the LCK for all the wrong reasons. It was Dplus KIA taking on OK BRION, and shocking the world, DK has a clean 2-0 win over Bro. This basically never happens when these two teams face off against each other. I jokingly called this a major rivalry in the LCK, but it kind of is. I've talked about it a lot on this channel. The reason you know that DK is a team that kind of means business this year, or alternatively, the reason you could make the argument that they're not going anywhere this year, is because Bro didn't just randomly beat them in the middle of the regular season. That usually seems to be what happens when you think back to prime Damwon in the LCK in 2020 and 2021. Bro was regularly taking them down in both splits. It was really funny to watch, and always ended up being a bit of a treat to see these two teams go head to head, but DK does get the job done against all odds in this series. One thing to note for Bro, we kind of hyped up Krako coming in to play jungle for this team, and I certainly thought that that was going to be a major upgrade for them, but It doesn't look like that's going to be the case. Ellum is certainly not still starting in the jungle, but right now it's Hanwha coming back in from the winter split. I think this is probably the second best option just because Ellum has no reason to be playing in the LCK. This guy's not good enough to be in the LCK, and he doesn't really have the upside to get better. Hanwha is not good enough to be in the LCK, but at least you have the idea of upside with him. But that's a real concern for me. If Krako isn't going to be the starting jungler here, which I don't know if that's going to be a full-on case, I don't really see any reason for him not to be playing right now if they do have him, but why would you sign him if you're not going to use him? That being said, if Hanwha is the full-time starter once again in the jungle here, don't treat this as the number 8 team in my power rankings, treat this as the number 9 team in my power rankings because Hanwha was atrocious, the worst player in the LCK in the winter split. Again, his upside's great. I like the Challengers League tape from last year. I'm certainly not trying to say it makes no sense to play this guy, but it certainly doesn't make your team right now better, and we continue to see that. They play worse with him in than they do without him in, and that's already a team that was really struggling. So let's go ahead and talk about it. Player of the series, really back and forth for me. It was either Lucid or Beryl. Both of them were excellent, but I'm going to give it to Beryl, mostly for the Maokai game in game number 2. Maokai is a really good champion, and everybody just forgets about this until either midway through the summer split or right before Worlds, and then Maokai becomes the number 1 played jungler and champion in the game once again. But Beryl obviously can operate this guy really well from the support position, the unbelievable CC layering, the difficulty that it takes to take him down early or later on into the game, and then obviously the area control that Maokai offers, which is completely second to none. It's just really difficult to play against this champ no matter which part of the map he's coming from, and Beryl did a great job operating there. He actually did a lot more damage than you would think, but most of the good effort coming in from Beryl here was because he was able to really dominate in terms of engage and just eating up a lot of that CC, making it harder for Bro to be able to operate. But Lucid was excellent here, completely gapped Hanwha in terms of the pressure he was able to generate. That should not surprise anyone. He got Neferi in game number 1. That was a mistake, and then he gets the Xin Zhao in game number 2 and does just as well. Overall, it was a really great series from both Lucid and Beryl, and both of them feel like they play off of each other very nicely. It's not like the rest of this team was bad. Shiwu in the top lane was just kind of better than Morgan. Morgan was fine, but Morgan usually plays better against Dplus KIA. It does feel like the series that he kind of turns on his brain for, but didn't quite happen here. Showmaker was great. Aiming was excellent. Once again, aiming is just this pinnacle of consistency so long as you're able to create for him. If you're asking him to be a primary option, he's not necessarily going to be that. You create for aiming and just kind of let him use his mechanics and not his brain. He's really good at that. So overall, Dplus KIA just continuing their great start, quite frankly, to this split, going 6-1 through their first 3 series. And Bro, the opposite. They go 1-6 through their first 3 series with 2 different junglers and a bunch of different problems. Polu's dead of the series, and it's only, I'm not saying only, but it really is just Elise in game number 1. I'm serious. Who do you think you are? I don't mean any disrespect to Polu. I certainly do mean disrespect to Bro's coaching and their management because they've been actually running it for years. This is a completely mismanaged roster. This is one of the worst organizations in the world in terms of actual decision-making and roster construction. So yes, I do mean offense to them, but what are we possibly trying to do with this draft in game number 1? How do we ever think this is going to operate against Dplus KIA? Even if you somehow, some way are able to generate a lead in game number 1, how do you keep it? How do you stop Neferi at any point throughout game number 1? How is Lucid ever supposed to lose this game? And that's not even accounting for the fact that Shiwu can just press R and basically burst the entire team down instantly. It's just a really bad decision, and it does really hurt this team's success chance because you're going into game 2 basically guaranteed down 0-1. Now in game 2, you got beaten even harder because you just played worse, and Polu was a big part of that. The rel engages were not good. He's dead of the series for a reason, but you put yourself in such a hole in game number 1 because this draft is, in my opinion, actually unplayable if you are not leagues better than the team that you're playing into, and it's just kind of doomed from there. But once again, I'm gonna rag on Hanwha. No pressure, no priority. Lucid's awesome, and I'm certainly not saying that I expect Hanwha to be as good as Lucid right now because that's just a ridiculous expectation, but he's gotta not run it. He's gotta stop being in the wrong place at the wrong time super consistently. This guy is a good team fighter. He knows what to do in the 5v5s. You ask him to do anything pre-15 minutes, he is very lost at the LCK level right now. That's the scouting report, is just play something that can take advantage of him early because he's a horrible early game pather, at least in his current form. I think he can get better there, but it's been a real issue at the LCK level. Morgan wasn't able to step up. Closer's been the best player on this team, and hype is still generating a lot of hype. Same thing with Hanwha, same thing even with someone like Wei, because KT Challengers was so hyped coming into the year, but these guys have not performed. I get it. There is a lot of prospect pedigree to go around, but I need to see results at the LCK level. Hype has had a couple of good games, and he wasn't the problem here, and obviously Polu kind of ran him throughout a lot of this series, but Bro is not a good team. This is very likely a bottom 2 team right now in the LCK, and that's, you know, kind of what you would expect with the way that this team has been managed over the past couple of years. But it's a nice win for DK. They're 2-0. Lucid and Beryl playing off of each other very well is a really nice sign, or I should say 3-0, not 2-0. And I think they're going to be hopeful that they can walk out of this week by the end of it with an undefeated record. Moving on now to day number 2, and we kicked off day number 2 with a matchup between BNK FearX and DRX, and in a bit of a shocking upset, BFX is going to pick up the win here, 2-0. They're the better team by a very considerable margin. They really dominate this series. It wasn't particularly close. 3 of these members of BFX just completely pop off and are the best players on the Rift, and DRX have no answer to them, and this is really surprising for me. Not that I think that DRX is a great team by any means. They're number 7, and I talked about it in my primer going into the spring split. If I had just went off my grading scale, they were the number 9 team in terms of my grading scale, but I bumped them up to number 7 because it felt like they should be better than that, and they should be. UCal and Teddy and even someone like Rich, like they should be better than the number 9 or 8 team in the LCK, but right now they're just not. BFX, you know, I said how Bro kind of moves down to number 9 if Krako's not in the lineup. Well, that puts BFX up at number 8, and you know what? They might be even better than that at the current moment because this was a really great win, and they are starting to piece together some momentum, which I think is really cool. They're above 500. They're 5-3 even in terms of game score, let alone 2-1 in terms of series score. So really not that bad of a start for them, but player of the series for me is kind of a big deal because it's going to Clear in the top lane. Now, obviously, this probably was a pretty motivating series for Clear. This is his former organization, the org that he came through the academy system with and kind of played with until, you know, he was signed up by Sandbox and given the job here. And, you know, I'm sure there's always a bit of revenge on the mind when you go against your former org, but this is a guy who has looked entirely mentally checked out for all of 2025, even going back to the beginning of the winter split, before we knew this team was as bad as they were, at least before everybody else did. I had them at number 10 in my preseason rankings, but, you know, before everybody else knew that this team was going to be bad, Clear was already mentally checked out, and that carried through all through winter. It was the case in week 1 here in spring as well. He was awesome in this series, specifically in game 2 on the Renekton. He absolutely deserved the player of the series for how he ended up playing, because Rich actually did live up to the hype in this series. Rich was probably the best player on DRX throughout this entire series, and it did not matter. Clear was even better than him, so really need to see that stay consistent, and you need to see the same thing from Raptor, who was also really good. I think Broadcast ended up giving him player of the series. Mega jungle gap, and honestly, this is the strategy that you need to be drafting regularly if you're BFX. I do not want to see Raptor on Sejuani. I don't want to see him on Maokai. I don't want to see him on these facilitators. I love those champions, but it's not playing to the strength of the player. This is a feast or famine jungler that is either going to win or lose you the game. Get him Nefiri, get him Viego, get him the comfort picks that allow him to generate resources against players like Sponge, where he is just more mechanically talented than them. On the other side of this matchup, Raptor was the best player on a FearX team that made playoffs in summer of last year. People forget that. This is a guy who can perform at this level with the right setup. It just hasn't been consistent. He's never going to be consistent, right? He's never going to be somebody that wins you games regularly, but he can do it. Diablo is great, and you don't need me to tell you that. I've been singing his praises all year long. He's so much better than anyone could have predicted, and he completely gapped Teddy in this matchup. Like, it wasn't even remotely close. Kellen doesn't get nearly enough credit for how good he's been over the course of this year. Everybody wants to sing the praises of Diablo, and no one wants to talk about how Kellen makes it so much easier for him to get there. Even Vikla was good in this series. UCal is the guy for DRX, and Vikla came out and was probably more useful on BFX's side. This was just a great series from them, and it catapults off of their big win in week number 1. 2-1 is a crazy place for this team to be after they didn't win a single series in winter. This is an awesome start to spring, and hopefully it means the growth is real, but for DRX on the other side, this team is bad, and they're like actually bad. Bottom 3 or bottom 2 kinds of bad, and it's coming in a lot of different areas. I think the main one for me, though, was the bot lane in this series, both of whom were tremendously awful. Take your pick, like flip a coin, Teddy or Ondel, on who should be done of the series here. It should go to one of those two. As bad as Sponge was, and even really as bad as UCal was in comparison to expectation, it kind of has to be one of the members of the bot lane because they just stopped trying. I'm giving it to Teddy because of the one play that everybody's going to point out, where instead of just killing Kellen and trying to turn a lot of this game on its head and, you know, getting some gold in his pocket so he can start taking over, he just goes and hits the wave. Everybody's freaking out, like, oh, why would Teddy ever do that? Does no one watch DRX play? Has no one watched Teddy play in the last year and a half? I have been talking about this every week. I've been getting getting crucified in the comment section for bringing stuff like this up. The dude does not have a killer mentality. He just does not. He values consistency over everything, and that means there are so many circumstances where he leaves meat on the bones in these games. He does not maximize his resources that are available to him, and that's why he's not an elite carry at this level. I'm so tired of people saying that Teddy is elo held on DRX. He is not. He is part of the problem on this team. Now, I'm not going to pretend it's a perfect setup around him. Ondel continues to be the worst support in the LCK. He still would rank as my number 10 support, and I think it was backed up in terms of performances here, but he outkilled his AD carry, and quite frankly, there were multiple times where he was more relevant than Teddy in this series, which is frustrating because he didn't play well. It's just not a good look for this bot lane. Sponge got mega jungle gapped. Even Yucal wasn't particularly good in this series, and if Yucal's not playing well, this team is not winning a single game. He is everything that they have, but I will say, Rich has looked pretty good in the spring split. I'm certainly not going to try and move heaven and earth to say that Rich should be on a better team or anything like that. He still is pretty one-dimensional as a player, but that one dimension is at least valuable in terms of team fighting. He just needs some help in order to get there, and Clear just had too much of an early lead in game number 2 for that Mbessa to be able to take over, but this is not a good DRX team. They are significantly worse than they were in winter, not only because I think the team itself is playing worse, but because I think the bottom of the standings has gotten better. BFX has clearly gotten better on the other side of this matchup. They've now beaten a lot of the teams near the middle or bottom of the standings, and that means that they might not even be bottom 2. This might be a team that's closer to being top 6 than they are to being number 9, which is ridiculous considering where they were just a week or two ago. It is unreal that they've made that kind of leap, but a lot of that has to do with some inconsistencies, and BFX, I think, is the team right now that's capitalizing the most on it. But then moving on to our second series of day number 2, and it's time for our first telecom war of the spring split. It's T1 taking on KT Rolster, and T1 is going to dominantly pick up the 2-0 win. These were two very not close games. Game 2 had some moments. BDD is just really good at League of Legends. It does not matter, though. Everyone else on this team is just a disaster at this current moment. They have made some roster changes. Both of these teams have coming into this series, as you can see, denoted with the asterisk. Definitely two roster changes that are going to grab some headlines. We'll talk about them both in terms of how they affected not only this series, but the outlook of these teams moving forward. But I don't want to take this entire series to be like I told you so, because that doesn't feel necessarily correct. I'm a huge fan of Gumayusi, and I'm a huge fan of Smash, and that's not even really what I want to talk about here. They both would have popped off. Quite frankly, it would have been unfair to sit here and say that I didn't expect Gumayusi to destroy, KT Rolster like this. Both of them could have done this, absolutely. They're about similar skill levels. Gumayushi's probably a little better right now even, but Smash has crazy upside. I totally get the decision, but this is it for KT fans, right? Like, this is exactly what I said throughout all of last week. A lot of KT fans, and I really respect you guys because you sit through the hard times, but there was a lot of copium talking about, oh, if we just, bring Paddock in the bot lane, things are going to get better. If we bring Casting in and get rid of Perfect on the top side, things are going to get better. Once Peter gets settled in and plays for Wei, things are going to get better. KT is fundamentally broken. This team is not working at the current moment, and I get that T1's really good and that you can't take too much from an 0-3 start when they basically only played teams that are supposed to beat them, but it's looked real bad, and I just don't think that subbing players in is immediately going to fix the problem, and unfortunately that does look like it's going to be the case for them. But again, we'll talk about it a bit more in terms of depth when we get more into the video. So let's talk about T1 first and foremost. Maybe shockingly to a lot of people, I'm going to give player of the series to Doran. That Mbessa ultimate, like, come on, man. That's the top one Mbessa ultimate that you've seen this year. That is just end of story. Really great stuff from him in that second game. He is sometimes a little bit feast or famine, a little bit hit or miss on that champion specifically, but when it hits, it looks really good. And quite frankly, he's been exceptionally good as the T1 top laner over the course of this year. We knew that this was going to happen. Zeus is inherently a more inconsistent player than someone like Doran, which is not the reputation that a lot of people have for those two players. People think that Zeus is more consistent because he performs internationally and Doran doesn't, but domestically, it's basically the opposite. Zeus in the regular season is going to have some good games and bad games, and Doran is almost never a problem in the regular season. In fact, he's pretty consistently been an all-pro, like top 2 caliber top laner in the regular season domestically, and even in the playoffs. This is a guy who performs in Korea, and he once again did that here. Casting stood no chance, especially at the end. That team fighting from him was tremendous, but if you want to put it on either of the bot lane members, like, yeah, they definitely decimated here. Smash and KIA were untouchable. Smash is excellent. The fact that they have 280 carries that KT would give everything for right now is just unbelievably ridiculous. It's actually unfair. Somebody posted a meme where it's like BDD looking at Gumayushi on the bench while he has to play with Dectum and Paddock, and it's very funny, right? You know what I mean? It's just one of those situations where T1 has an embarrassment of riches in that role. Smash can be a dominant carry, and this is kind of the difference between Guma and Smash in terms of playstyle for me. Smash is much more of a like focal point carry type of player. He wants to be the main character, the primary option, where I think Guma is a lot more comfortable being that facilitative, like secondary carry, almost weak side player if you need him to be, and let KIA kind of move around the map and, you know, do whatever you want. Both of them can do the other thing. I definitely feel more comfortable about Guma carrying than I do about Smash being like a dominant Jhin player long term, but Smash is awesome as a carry, and I would argue that he's just as good, if not better, in that specific role than Gumayushi is, although Guma's probably a more well-rounded player. Again, pros and cons, but they're two of the top, I don't know, 7 80 carries in the world, 7 to 10 80 carries in the world. It's just unfair that they're both in this org. KIA got the broadcast player of the series, and I totally get it. The Rakan was very sexy in game number 2. A very good look from him. KIA is ridiculous, and honestly, he's had an underratedly phenomenal year. Owner continues to be one of the most consistent junglers in the world, which kind of bucks his own trend in that regard because puts up no resistance, and Faker was probably the only member of the team that didn't stand out, but that's because BDD was really good on the other side. It's not even Faker playing bad. T1 just is who they are at this point. We, again, have a pretty good idea of what they're going to be, kind of depending on which 80 carry is down there, but their defined playstyles with both of them are both successful, so you can't really complain. And then for KT, again, I feel really bad saying this about KT fans, but when I told everyone to pump the brakes on this team potentially getting better moving forward, it was because I just don't think their foundational issues have all that much to do with just losing individually, like 1v1 or 2v2 bot. Cuz has been horrible this year. Perfect, honestly, hasn't even been all that bad. People are overrating how not good he's been because KT is really struggling. Yes, I agree. The bot lane has been decently unplayable, especially in winter when it was Dectum and Wei. I think things looked a little bit better when it was Dectum and Peter at the start here of spring and week number 1, even if they were still losing pretty heavily, and I definitely agreed with putting Paddock in, but trying to pretend like this team goes from being the number 8 team to the number 4 team in the LCK by putting Paddock in is just ridiculous. They've been at number 6 in my power rankings basically all year long, and that does not change with Paddock coming in. It certainly doesn't change with casting getting the full job on the top side. This team is super one-dimensional. It is BDD or bust. They are DRX, but slightly better because BDD is just slightly better than UCal, and that's really it. This bot lane got trounced once again. Paddock honestly looked worse than Dectum in this first series. Now, again, Smash was very enabled. KIA had an amazing series, and Owner was really active on the Nocturne, and so I can't blame them too much, but they looked awful here. Paddock, of course, is done of the series. If you wanted to give it to Peter, that's totally respectable, but casting gets run over on the top side, easily the worst of these two top laners. Cuz I don't think has been the better jungler in a series in 2025. This dude has just been a letdown over and over again for this team. BDD or bust, and that's such a frustrating place to be, and honestly, the ceiling of that team is number 6. Like, that's the best that they could possibly do. I still believe they have enough talent to be a playoff team. Their schedule has been brutally hard to start off the spring split, and I do think it will get better for them, but this is not a team that's going to suddenly compete or suddenly be, like, anywhere near the top 4. They are at least 2 tiers down from all of those teams, and T1 very much proved that here. This team is ridiculously talented, and this was just another showcase that it doesn't matter who's playing for this team. They're going to dominate no matter what. All of this fuss in the offseason was basically for nothing because they have too many talented players and they can win in a variety of different ways. Then moving on now to day number 3, our middle day of the LCK week here, and it was a battle of winless teams. One of them had to come out on top. It was OK BRION taking on the DN Freecs. And OK BRION is going to pick up the 2-1 series win. They drop game number 1, but they're able to pull back the pseudo reverse sweep. I guess official reverse sweep. It's a best of 3. It counts with the game 2 and game 3 wins respectively. And they're able to take their first series of the spring split. I still don't think either of these teams are particularly good, but it's clear that DNF has significantly more problems than anybody else in the LCK at the moment. But this really did feel like a battle between the 2 worst teams in the LCK. We'll see if that ends up being correct as we go on throughout the rest of this split, but at least for now, not a particularly encouraging sign from either of these 2 teams, at least in my opinion. The one player I do feel pretty good about, honestly, coming out of this series, though, is Closer, the mid laner for Bro. Is it weird to say that this is the most impressed I've ever been with Closer as a starting player in the LCK? I ragged on this guy pretty considerably ever since he got that starting job on Sandbox back in the day. Really felt like he was being hyped up because his team was good rather than he was good. Like Krako, Prince, and KO Kale were doing so much on 2022 Sandbox that, you know, it just made things a lot easier, I guess, for Closer to be able to play his, you know, aggressive, like, carry mid laners over and over again and not have to worry too much about anything. And then when those guys left, when it was more difficult and the team really started to lose talent, he was certainly not able to keep up with a lot of the other mid laners. He was kind of the gatekeeper, as I like to call him, significantly worse than any of the competent mid laners at that level, but better than the ones who really weren't able to find their footing over the course of the last few years. But now he comes over to Bro, is actually given more of the keys to the kingdom, and actually has looked just really good all year long. Even when this team looks bad, Closer is often the player who looks good. Now, again, I get it. Bulldog is not good. On the other side of this, he's probably the worst mid laner, maybe outside of Vikla in the LCK at the current moment, but, you know, Closer's still kind of showing up and showing out regularly for this team, has to start getting noticed by me. I'm not just going to stick to my old grades if he continues to improve and look better. He has just been better in 2025, in my opinion, than he certainly was in 2024 or 2023, but I would maybe even argue that the tape right now is more impressive than his 2022 when he was actually an all-pro in the LCK. So, you know, nice stuff from him. I think he doesn't really have a lot to work with, and he's still making the most of it. The bot lane was pretty solid here, too. Hype and Polu probably played one of their more consistent series. Polu, in particular, was really solid here. Hype did a good job of capitalizing on a lot of the setup that was made by both Polu and Morgan throughout a lot of these games. Morgan obviously pulling out the Fiora into the Yorick, a very fun Game 3 top lane matchup, but Hype did a good job. You know, I'm still not, like, crazy impressed with him. I honestly don't even think he was the better AD carry in this series, but he definitely has something to build on that I don't think a lot of the other KT Challengers rookies have shown at all. Like Hanbok and Wei obviously were not having those moments, and so it's nice to see at least Hype coming up and at least having some semblance of, you know, the ability to carry at this level. But if Polu's going to play fine and Closer's actually just going to be the best player on Bro, things do get a lot easier. Morgan was fine here, being able to at least ignore the Yorick and kind of shut him down for as long as possible in game number 3, and even Hanbok was definitely the better jungler here. I say even Hanbok. It really sucks that I'm a hater of this guy now, but I really am. Like, I just have not liked the tape. Pioshik's just worse than Hanbok, and I'm not saying that that's been the case over this year. These have easily been the two worst junglers in the LCK, but Hanbok definitely was less detrimental to his own team in this series, which is a positive. So, nice stuff from Bro. They get that 2-1 win, and they are not going to stay winless. They at the very least get to pick up one in the first round robin here the first couple of weeks, but DNF will end their first couple of weeks at 0-4, and honestly, they deserve it. They look atrocious. They've won 2 games in total across the first 2 weeks of the LCK. It's just completely unacceptable with this roster and presumably how much they are paying for this roster, and you can point to one player in particular to me that's just completely ruining the chemistry of this team, and it continues to be Pioshik, who's going to get dead of the series. I think we've hit the point now where you have to bench him. Like, you just have to go in a different direction. I don't even care who it is in the jungle. It can be a complete no-name, right? It can be somebody who's never played at the tier 1 level before, somebody who doesn't even have a chance to be able to compete day 1. At least bring someone in who has the potential to communicate and talk to the rest of his team, because Pioshik is on a completely different planet from everybody else that he's playing with. I just don't understand what is going on. The Nefiri game in game 2 was bad. The Sejuani game in game 3 was worse. If you're gonna play a facilitator, you gotta facilitate. You can't just stay alone on your own island the entire game. On Sejuani, like, what are we doing? It just feels like I don't know if it's not trying. I don't know if he just doesn't like playing with the players he's playing with, or if because the team is doing bad, he's just checked out, or if he's just a bad player now. Like, all of those things could be the case, but it just looks so bad for Pioshik. It's like unplayable at this level, and it sucks because Berserker is really good. I know he really faltered at the beginning of this week. He had his worst series, in my opinion, as a member of DNF, but he's back to kind of doing his thing, which is playing totally fine throughout these series and just not being able to win because the rest of the team sucks. Bulldog was worse than Closer, even if he wasn't detrimentally bad. Dudu was actually pretty good in this series. He was at least attempting to be aggressive. This was a pretty decent week for Dudu, all things considered, but Life is not able to really create anything because, once again, there's no jungle support synergy on this team at all. I'm at my breaking point with Pioshik. You gotta bench him. I don't think there's actually a way to salvage this situation unless Pioshik is out of the starting lineup. Maybe you have to do more than that. Maybe Life has to go as well, but Pioshik needs to be the player that gets benched because there's just no fixing it when he is in the lineup, in my opinion. But for Bro, on the other side, at least Closer's looking good. It's certainly good enough to not be number 10 in the league. Is it good enough to be top 7 or top 8? Probably not at the current moment. I still have some major question marks, but there were certainly some good performances here, and not going winless through the first 2 weeks is certainly a positive. Then moving on to our second series of day number 3, and just as we had a battle between two winless teams, it's time for an undefeated matchup between Gen.G and Nongshim RedForce. That Gen.G is going to pick up the win in a 2-0 series with, no surprise here, Gen.G is the best team right now in the LCK. They really proved that in week number 1 when they demolished Hanwha Life esports and really didn't make it all that close. Nongshim is a good team. They are clearly the number 5 team in the LCK, not quite on the level of the top 4, but I think significantly better than all of the teams in the bottom half at the current moment, the bottom 5, if you will. And so, I like Nongshim, but they just don't have the firepower to beat a team like Gen.G, especially when Duro steps up in the way that he did in this series. Because if Nongshim needs one thing, it's a support gap. That's what they function entirely off of, and that is not something that happened in this series. So let's go ahead and talk about it, because player of the series is going to go to Duro in the support position. Nobody needs to hear that I'm high on Duro. I've said that over and over again. In fact, if you go back to last year, he was an all-pro for me. He was third team all-pro for me in this summer split. He played half the split for FearX, and I still made him an all-pro. That's how highly I thought of his tape in the summer split. I thought it was a genius move for Gen.G to be able to bring him in. Obviously, I love Lehens, but Duro is basically like Delight reincarnated in terms of the trajectory that he's on, where he wasn't on a great team at the start of his career. He goes to Gen.G to play with all of these great players, and it just kind of works out. He gets to develop into being one of the best supports in the world, and it didn't look perfect in winter, but it's getting better and better every single game, and it's really starting to culminate right now in him just absolutely dominating series. Like, this was unreal. This Alistair game, one of the best that we've seen all year long. Genuinely one of those performances you just gotta tip your cap to, right? He just outplayed Lehens. He was just better than Lehens, who he replaced on the other side of this matchup. Really great stuff from Duro. If he's gonna be able to continuously step up like this, it's kind of over for the rest of the LCK. I think that was really the one big weakness in Gen.G's game, at least the one consistently exploitable one. Of course, players like Keen and Canyon aren't going to be the most consistent. Even Ruler might not be the most consistent, but Duro, if he's going to step up and be a monster, it alleviates a lot of the issues that this team could potentially even have. But the rest of this team was pretty darn good as well. Keen was awesome on the top side. They left open Gwen for Keen, and I was like, that's a very intriguing decision. Surely they have something prepared to counter that if they're willing to give that over on red side. Diana, what? Like, we'll talk about it a bit more later. I do not understand this even a little bit. I can't imagine that Diana is playable into Gwen, and you know what? It wasn't. So credit to Kingen. He tried his best to play on hard mode, and he succeeded. Like, he played on hard mode, and he didn't succeed in winning it, but he did play on hard mode. So shout out to Keen. Played really well on the Gwen. Still was useful on the Scion in game 2 as well. Ruler was awesome, especially because Duro was so adept at being able to set him up. This was a super free game for Ruler to just be able to kill Jiwoo over and over again because it was so difficult to avoid the Alistair. Chovy is unreal. He was unreal in week 1. He continues to be great here. Fisher was never going to stand a chance against him, and Canyon was also great. Remember, when these two teams played off in the lower bracket in the playoffs, one of the big reasons why Nongshim kind of was better than Gen.G in that series, even if they didn't come out on top, was because Lehens was just better than Duro. If Duro's going to step up, like I said, it's kind of Jover for Nongshim, and, we talk about that. I still don't think that much less of Nongshim after this loss. Yeah, you can look at game 1 and be like, Diana top, what are we doing here? Kingan's getting dead of the series almost entirely for picking that and for playing the way that he did. There's just no justifiable reason for that ever to have existed, but Kingan's been really great for Nongshim over the course of this year, so I'm not going to rag on him all that much. Even someone like Gideon played totally fine here. He did his best to be able to survive on the Neferi in game 1, even though he lost pressure early because, bot lane was doing bot lane things and top lane was just getting obliterated. And then the Wukong was just not able to do enough in game 2, but the bot lane also kind of got run over. Jiwoo was pretty awful here in terms of his positioning. I don't like hyper carries in this meta. I've been pretty clear about that in other regions, but we haven't had to talk about it all that much in the LCK. If it was ever going to work in a region, it is going to be in the LCK, but Zeri, Jinx, Aphelios, like, not Kaisa, because I think she can do other things, but these hyper carries that you kind of put on these players to just get them into the late game, I just don't think it's a consistent way to win right now. If you are as immobile as a lot of these champions are, you're going to get punished pretty heavily. And even with Zeri's mobility, it still is pretty easy to just kind of take her out of the game in the early game and not really allow her to ever get back in, which we did see because skirmishing is kind of essential in the game right now, and Zeri just doesn't really do that. And then Lehens, like we said, kind of got outplayed. His KDAs are always going to look worse when this team loses. It's just kind of the lay of the land because he's not going to stop being aggressive, but I still feel good about Lehens. I just feel great about Gen.G. This was a predictable outcome, but it went in a way that made me feel even better about Gen.G, and it didn't make me feel worse about Nongshim. These teams are in the places that they should be considering what their rosters are, and Gen.G right now looks like easily the #1 contender for best team in the world if they're able to maintain this form. Then moving on now to day number 4, and we kick day 4 off with a very intriguing outcome between Hanwha Life Esports and T1, a series a lot of people were really excited to see that ended up being not close in the slightest. A complete stomp coming in from HLE, dominating and picking up a 2-0 win. You know, some people were concerned about HLE coming out of week number 1. I definitely saw a lot of sentiment claiming, okay, you know, they definitely are kind of off their game starting off. You know, they kind of took it easy after first stand. They were able to make that big miracle run through the playoffs, but they were not the best team in the LCK. And, you know, first stand was only easy because the LCK is so hard, and that's like the real international tournament, all of that stuff. And they go out and get dominated by Gen.G, and that's kind of confirmed a lot of people's fears. And then T1 goes out and puts up an incredible series against Gen.G. Of course, they still drop in that series, but it's super close. It's one of the series of the year, if not the series of the year, when all is said and done. And, you know, people are starting to feel higher on T1 than they are on Hanwha Life, especially with how T1 played earlier on this week against KT, but leave it to HLE to bring things back to reality in a series like this, where now all the pressure is on, it's time to step up, and that's exactly what they did. This was not close in any capacity. Top gap, jungle gap, mid gap, AD carry gap, support gap. Like, end of story. There was not a single lane that survived for T1. You cannot blame one player more than the other, in my opinion, because everything went wrong for this team. So let's go ahead and go over a player of the series for me. Is going to go to Viper in the bot lane. It felt like he was the most consistent, and really, it honestly felt like Caitlyn was just too big of a problem in game number 2. One thing that I'm going to talk about is I just don't really understand what the plan is for the draft in game 2. I get that Kalista Ashe can be very difficult to play into, and you want to first pick that Kalista. You want to be able to try and get that priority early. Ashe is kind of the standard pick that ends up shutting that down, so you just pair it up with the Kalista. It's something that KIA can play at a really high level, and this lane can be a little bit scary after the Renata is taken away on the other side, and so you end up just going with that. However, if the Caitlyn's gonna be left up, and you're gonna give Jax to Zeus, what's really the point of any of this? How is Kalista ever supposed to play this game? And that's not even adding on to the fact that Smash isn't a Kalista player. Like, that's not what he's brought in to do. This guy plays late game carries. That's kind of the whole thing, is he's a team fighter. He's somebody who pops off later on in games, bit of a KDA monster in that regard. And Viper just obliterates this team, and part of it is the fault of these players. KIA completely ran it in that second game on Ashe. He was not even remotely trying to play the game, but part of this is just, what are we even trying to set up here? Like, Caitlyn was already going to be in a pretty perfect position to dominate this game, and that's exactly what she did. So credit to Viper, awesome series from him. It's not like Delight deserves any less of the credit for that responsibility. He was excellent. I think Zeka ended up getting player of the series on the broadcast. I certainly can't complain about that. When you talk about a mid gap, this was a mid gap. Faker looked like a bronze 2 player trying to play into Zeka. I don't think I've ever seen Faker so disoriented in terms of just trying to find his bearings on the map, because Zeka was everywhere. You can't give this guy Yone Silas and expect to be able to survive. We just talked about this earlier on in the week. When you give him his comfort picks, he goes from being a top 5 to 10 player in the world to being a top 1 to 2 player in the world. That is the difference between Zeka on his best champs and Zeka on everything else. It's not like he's ever bad. He's always a super valuable mid laner, but he is unstoppable when he gets to play the things he's really good at. And that's what he did here. He made Faker look like a complete chump, honestly. And that's just ridiculous. That should never happen in the mid lane here. Zeus dominated Doran. Doran is Zeus's father domestically, and it did not matter in this series. Peanut was awesome at being able to facilitate things. He took down the Neferi in game number 1, really outjungled him in that regard. This was just an everything gap for HLE. They were the better team by a country mile, and that's a really impressive feat, but it's mostly T1 just completely running it down. As much as I want to give a lot of the credit to HLE, I think a lot of the blame does go on T1 for how this series ended up going. Of course, you can look at players like Doran and Faker that just played bad, and you can just simply go, well, they played bad. Like, they underperformed in terms of their gameplay, and that's going to happen every once in a while because, you know, inconsistency is just natural for players like that, especially because they haven't been perfect recently. Even Owner wasn't perfect in this series, but when you look at how KIA played this, it felt malicious. Like, I don't know if he's protesting that Smash is in, but, like, what was that game 2 on the Ashe? Like, I've never seen a player just completely lose his mind like KIA did. This felt like a pretty standard barrel performance from a couple of years ago, for those of you who have followed the channel and kind of understand what I'm trying to put down there, where it's just like, man, you gotta chill out. Like, you really gotta figure your situation out here. And the funny thing is, like, people are gonna say, oh, Smash in, you know, they looked good and they looked competitive against Gen.G with Gumayushi. Smash comes in, they get slaughtered. by HLE, like that's the negative. Smash was easily the best player on the team. Now, I'm certainly not trying to sit here and say that he was in the vicinity of making this series close, and I think generally the KDA is not indicative of the fact that Smash absolutely got destroyed in terms of the 2v2 here, but if you're comparing him to the rest of T1, he certainly wasn't the one running these games. What's he supposed to do on Kalista once Viper takes Caitlyn and he has to play into a fed Jax? How is he ever supposed to operate here? Not only that, but he's not a Kalista player. Again, I can't reiterate that enough. It's not something that he does. This was just such a weird series overall for T1. Everything kind of going wrong in terms of planning and execution, and you know, you just gotta put this one on the back burner because it's just a very weird one to talk about, but it's dominant for HLE, and it really is a reassuring sign that this team still is one of the best in the world. I never really doubted that. I kept them in the top 2 just because Gen.G very clearly has proven that they deserve to be considered number 1 right now, but Hanwha Life is probably the second best team in the world, and they deserve to win first stand. This is still one of the scariest teams on the planet, and they could sweep the LCK this year, and no one would really be all that shocked. That's how good these players are, especially when you give them the resources they had here. But then moving on to our second series of day number 4, and we finally get a victory for this team as it's KT Rolster taking on BNK FearX, and KT is going to pick up the 2-1 series win. They get their first series win of the split here, and obviously it couldn't have come at a better time. This team was definitely spiraling, but as much as I really do like this result, and trust me, I'm going to bring up a lot of good here. I certainly don't want KT fans, yelling at me in the comment section for not respecting that Casting and Peter played really well in this series, that Cuz really stepped up and played well here, that BDD was obviously very good. Like, all of those things happened, but I feel like there still is some cold water to douse on this situation. Like, yeah, Casting and Peter looked a lot better when they were playing BFX than when they were playing, T1 earlier on in the week. And maybe, I don't know, Perfect and, I'm not saying Wei, because I don't think Wei is very good, but maybe Perfect looks better against BFX than he did in his first 2 series that we saw against, DK and Hanwha Life, the, 2 of the better teams in the world, just in general, with some of the better top laners in the world, especially in terms of production. Like, I love sitting here and being like, yes, Casting and Peter, they're getting more comfortable playing at this level, but there's just a difference in terms of competition. This was always a series that they were going to, or at least supposed to win, and I think they lived up to expectations here, but it's still to be determined if this team is even remotely playable at a top 5 level, which is really their goal at the end of the day. For BFX, they still won game number 2, and they didn't just win game 2, they kind of dominated game 2. Yes, they kind of got obliterated in games 1 and 3, and so I am, not entirely bought in on them. They clearly have some pretty big weaknesses. This is not a complete team by any means. It's not like I'm trying to be in on FearX. It's just, I don't think this team is all that far off from being top 6, which is crazy to say considering how bad they've been. That's just how bad the bottom of the LCK is and kind of has been for the last year and a half, but we'll get into it. Let's talk about KT first. Player of the series, it's gonna go to Cuz in the jungle. Obviously, he makes the big play at the end of game number 3. Jumping in, smiting the objective, killing clear, scaring off Raptor, basically completely shifting the tempo of the game entirely by himself, but he did a lot more than that throughout this series, and there is a narrative that I do want to push back on in terms of people defending Cuz just a little bit, not because I want to say this series was bad, but rather I think the expectation and the overall narrative surrounding Cuz is not what I think is accurate. I see a lot of people being like, oh, Cuz is getting used to playing with Casting and Peter, feels like he's starting to get better at creating opportunities with this new configuration of the team, as if he was playing at all fine in the winter split. He was bad in winter, and this team was winning in spite of him in winter. I talked about that a lot on this channel. It's not like he was playing well before Casting and Peter came in, before he had to get used to the new configuration. He was bad with Wei, he was bad with Dectum, he was bad with Perfect. He's just not been very good over the course of this year, but leave it to BFX to give him a ton of opportunities to get himself comfortable and back into a series like this. We know that Cuz can be a super great player at this level. He has been for a very long time. It's all just about the consistency, which he hasn't really had recently, so it's nice to see that at the very least he can have one good game to start off his split in the first couple of weeks, but broadcast ended up giving player of the series to BDD. And BDD can get every player of the series for KT Rolster. Is there ever going to be a time where I'm arguing with that? No. He is the life and blood of this team. If you wanted to give him player of the series regardless of how he played, just purely for his sacrifice throughout the rest of this split, I totally understand. And he did completely outplay Vikla. I just think Cuz was a little bit more important directly to the success of the team here. And again, I do want to praise Casting and Peter, who I think both played really well in this series. Casting did a great job of being able to corral Clear, who was not really all that great throughout this series series definitely had his own sorts of problems, even if he wasn't like actively running it in the ways that he was at the beginning of the year. But casting was definitely better than him and had a better laning phase in particular, was able to generate resources in a much more clear and cohesive way. And Peter, man, I'm gonna rag on him for picking Elise, because once again, I think if you pick Elise, you are just insane. Like, you have to be so much better than your opposition to make that champion work really in any capacity, but he got away with it because KT was better in that game number 3. If they had lost that, that would have been the funniest thing in the entire world, but Peter played excellent in this series. I'm a big Peter fan. He was a channel darling back in 2023, even really in 2022 when he was on that Nongshim team that was a complete disaster. This is a guy I've gone to bat for quite a while, so it's nice to see him actually performing here. The only player that I don't think stood out in a good way for me was Paddock, who continues to look a little bit outclassed at this level. Shout out Reddit, who was telling me over and over again that the moment that Paddock started on this team over Dectum, they would immediately be top 5. Paddock's not that guy. Like, I like Paddock, but he's a worse version of Diablo on the other side of this matchup, and I think that's become, unfortunately, a little bit clear. He's just too aggressive for his own good. He has no off button, but there is enough talent on this team to be able to overcome that when they're facing the bottom tier teams. Again, I want to reiterate that. Do I think this team is in a better spot than they were last week? Maybe, but I still think it's questionable. I'm certainly not guaranteeing that. They would have won this series regardless of who was in top lane or who was in, you know, the AD carry role. I firmly do believe that, and there are going to be people who disagree with that, but at least KT has proven that they're the number 6 team in the LCK. Even if BFX isn't like, you know, a superstar team, they certainly have enough talent to be able to compete here, and I think at times they showed that. In Game 2, they showed that. Diablo and Kellen continue to be very aggressive as a bot lane duo. Diablo still is going to receive a lot of the praise, but if Kellen's not sacrificing himself to set Diablo up in a lot of these instances, I just don't believe that things go their way. Certainly not pretending like Kellen was perfect, especially in Game 3 and in their losses, but when you're talking about Game 2 and where they got their advantages, I think it's noteworthy to point that out. I also think Raptor is not nearly going to get the credit he deserves for this series, even if he was out-jungled in Game number 3, but dud of the series for me is going to go to Vikla in the mid lane. Was pretty clearly the weak link, I think, throughout this series, and is kind of the weak link in the LCK. You can make a very strong argument he is the worst player now that Dectum has been benched in terms of performances this year in the LCK. I just can't think of a player who has let down his team more. He's just not a positive in any aspect. He's losing in lane. He's not a very good team fighter. He can't really skirmish. He has no macro. It's just not good. Like, you put him on Galio and just hope that he can facilitate someone else, because that's just best case scenario. But going into BDD is never going to be great. Vikla, of course, going in to his former organization that he won Rookie of the Year with many years ago. It's a very different Vikla and a very different version of this mid lane matchup now, and it's unfortunate that it's not going BFX's way, but overall, this is maybe still a top 7 team. Picking up a win against KT is really solid, and they did so in pretty great fashion. They have more going for them than the bottom 3 do right now, at least in my opinion. There's still a lot to like about BFX, but KT kind of getting themselves on the board here. I think a bevy of wins is probably going to be inbound for this team, just because their schedule is going to inherently get easier. They've already played so many of the top teams. It's not over just yet. They still have to play Gen.G, but outside of that, and maybe the Nongshim series, everything else, they should be favorites no matter who is starting in the lineup for them, so I would expect this team to start getting back on track, but I don't think all of it is because of the roster changes. But then moving on now to the 5th and final day of the LCK here in week number 2, and boy did we have a banger to kick off day number 5. It's a battle to see who will stay undefeated the longest. It's DK taking on Gen.G, and Gen.G picks up the 2-1 series win. Somehow, someway, they walk out of this series with the victory when it really should have been a 2-0 in favor of Dplus KIA, but that is not how things end up turning out. DK ends up throwing game number 2 when they had it clearly in the palm of their hand. Showmaker was so strong on the Cho'Gath, and they just aren't able to finish it. And then we move into game number 3. Showmaker picks the Vex as the answer to Cho v Sylas, and it feels like it's over. There's almost no way for Sylas or even Zed, even Camille, Callista to play into this Vex. It's the Omega pick on R5, and there's no real way to expect it to go Gen.G's way, but screw it. Who cares? Champions don't matter when you are better than the players you are playing into, and that's what Gen.G asserted over the course of this series, and that's why Chovy is getting my player of the series. I know that there are a lot of narratives surrounding this. The first Zed jungle that we've seen in the LCK ever, I believe. It might be in like the last decade or something ridiculous like that, but a Zed jungle for Canyon? Are you kidding me? In a do or die game 3 is the answer to Nefiri. Unreal stuff there, and then Chovy has to play Sylas into Vex, and you know what? You know the reason Chovy's getting player of this series? Because he's playing Sylas into Vex, and he won lane. He didn't just survive, he didn't just stay relevant and get to the late game and start taking over. He was up in gold, up in CS, up in pressure, and up in resources. How is that possible? Is this guy human? Like, I genuinely don't know what else to say. It feels like I glaze him at times, but this is an unwinnable matchup that he went out and just won. Like, it shouldn't be possible. And again, that's why he's getting player of the series, because I don't think any other player does this. I think every single other player in the world has a harder time in this matchup, but it doesn't matter. Chovy can't lose if he puts his mind to the task. It genuinely is impossible. Absolutely absurd stuff from him. I want to give a big shout out to Keen on the top side for this Camille as well. People are going to talk about the Sylas and the Zed and, you know, those big picks that ended up being more effective than we expected, but Keen definitely deserved the broadcast player of the series that he ended up getting. Really nice series from him overall. Shiwu was awesome on the other side, maybe with the exception of game number 3, but everybody kind of let DK down in game number 3. Keen was awesome, and I don't want to take anything away from that. Duro continues his hot streak, especially in that third game on Renata. Ruler was fine, solid enough. Canyon had his ups and downs, but still, how can you not take anything away other than the Zed jungle from this series? Like Gen.G, through the fire and the flames, through the thick and the thin, they end up coming out on top. They're the only team to go 4-0 through their first 4 series here in the LCK, and DK really should have that moniker themselves. They absolutely should be walking out of this series with the win, but they're just not able to get it done. Dud of the series was honestly really tough, because I don't think anybody played bad for DK. They probably should have 2-0'd this, and if they did, it would have been a completely different story, but I ended up landing on Lucid as my Dud of the series here. Not because I think he was like infinitely worse than Canyon on the other side of this or anything like that, but rather he just probably needed to be better on the Neferi in game 3. I think as Sejuani, especially at the end of game 2, could have used some work. He needed to be a little bit more consistent in those team fights of being able to set up the damage that was there for DK. It just didn't end up happening. Obviously, there are things you can complain about or things you can push forward for Lucid that kind of take away this idea of Dud of the series, but it's just so hard, man, because nobody on this team really deserved it. I considered Showmaker for Dud of the series, but after the Cho'Gath game, it just became kind of difficult for me to rationalize that. I don't think the Rise was, like, broken or anything. It typically is for Showmaker, but it wasn't in game number 1. It was kind of a team effort in game 1. Shiwu was awesome in that game on the Jace, but the Vex, man, like, he really let me down. This is a perfect Vex game. I mean, literally the dream, like, the idealistic Vex game, and he still didn't end up getting a lead in it. It's just really disappointing. He needed to be good in game 3, and it just didn't end up happening. Aiming and barrel were fine. I have no complaints about them, and Shiwu, like I said, was excellent. Probably the best player in this series for DK, but it just didn't matter. The script was already written. If you want a series where DK throws to Gen.G, you've got thousands of examples. I think they've lost 18 series in a row against Gen.G at this point, something absolutely ludicrous. It's just impossible for DK to be able to survive this, and that's to the credit of Gen.G. Through all of the obstacles they were thrown at in this series, they come out on top, and they will be the team alone at the top of the standings at the end of week 2. But that's going to bring us to our final series of the week here in week number 2, and it was a good one between Nongshim RedForce and DRX to close out this second week, and it's Nongshim who is going to pick up the 2-1 series win here. They're going to move to 3-1 to start this year, with their only loss being to Gen.G. They've kind of had the inverse effect to KT Rolster, though, where a lot of their schedule has been very beatable. They've basically only played bottom-tier teams up until this point. They absolutely should be 3-1. We'll see how they really get tested moving forward, because it does not get easier for them, but DRX finally doing what we've all begged them to do for weeks and weeks, months really at this point on end, and that's put Playta back in as the starting support. The fact that Ondol was starting over Playta made no sense to anyone involved in the LCK. Ondol wasn't even that bad on KDF last year. I think that there were some shining lights, there were some decent moments, but Playta should not be anywhere close to the Challengers League. This guy is way too good to be in tier 2, and he proved that last year. I couldn't remember if I gave him or Duro the third team All-Pro, but both of them were in the conversation, and both of them deserved it. Playta came off of what was a fantastic non-rookie split, but a re-emergence in the LCK, and then he got benched. It just made no sense to me, and it didn't make sense to a lot of people. I'm glad to see him back in the starting lineup, hopefully permanently. I'm sad they couldn't get him a win in his first series, and he definitely could have done more here to kind of really reinsert himself as the starting support, but still, you know, back in the lineup is a good place to start. And for Nongshim, this is just a genuinely good team on the other side of this. Like, they are not just, oh, you know, they're picking up wins because the rest of the LCK is bad. Part of that is true. Like, the bottom 4 teams are all a disaster, and KT is really just trying to figure themselves out right now, but Nongshim is actually good. They would be good in a lot of different scenarios. If they were in the LPL, they'd be a borderline top 2, top 3 team. That's where Nongshim is at. I think they have a lot going for them, and one of the big things for them right now is Gideon in the jungle, who's been exceptionally good in 2025. He's going to get player of the series here. Sponge had a pretty bad week for DRX, and definitely didn't really help his case that he played mostly carries in this series, but Gideon has just kind of been able to take advantage of most junglers right now. Obviously, the trajectory for him has looked very good over the course of his career. He wasn't given a ton of opportunities on KT when he really started. He had to go over to the LPL to really be given like a full opportunity on Invictus, but even then wasn't really given a fair shot. He was not very good for that team. I really was kind of concerned with whether or not he was ever going to be a starting tier 1 caliber player, but he comes over to Bro at the beginning of 2024 and actually does look really good for that team. Maybe not like a top tier jungler, but has definitely shown progression. He ends up getting benched because they wanted to bring in Youngjae. I think both of them are interesting junglers, so I can't begrudge them too much for that, but gets a spot here on Nongshim, and you know what? He's been awesome. I'm really, really excited to see that actually put into a good situation. That upward trajectory, that upward momentum he had been able to generate for himself over the course of his career was real, that it wasn't just like him getting more resources and opportunities in different positions. He's actually just been getting better over the course of time, and that's a really great statement. He's become a pretty clear top 5 jungler in the LCK, and we just weren't sure he was ever going to get to that spot. Really nice to be able to see that from him, but it's the rest of this team too. Kingen had a much needed bounce back series, we'll just say, after the Diana series earlier on this week against Gen.G. Of course, we kind of meme about that, but Kingen has been awesome this year. He's definitely been one of the best players on Nongshim and a reason why this team has been able to over-exceed expectations. I thought Lehens was much better here. Fisher was able to survive at the very least against Yucal, even if Yucal was definitely better than him, and Jiwoo, I think, obviously played better than he did against Gen.G, but overall, Gideon was the primary playmaker. Kingen was one of the main follow-up points in that big gap on the top side, and Nongshim just continued to kind of push through their strengths. It's kind of funny. They can win everywhere, maybe with the exception of mid lane. I just don't really expect them to ever play through Fisher, but he's been better than I expected this year anyways. I didn't think he was going to be playable at the LCK level. He's at the very least been able to survive in the mid lane, but they can play through jungle, they can play through top, they can certainly play through bot lane, and it's just a very difficult proposition to match up against Nongshim because they are a lot better in every area than people give them credit for. But for DRX on the other side, Yucal's pretty good, man. You know, Yucal did a lot of heavy lifting for this team, but just couldn't quite get over the hump. I think he could have done more on the Corki in Game 3. Perhaps, you know, BDD or one of those upper tier mid laners could have done more in this situation, but I mean, at that point where you're really grasping at straws, if you're blaming Yucal at all for this series, I think you've kind of lost the plot. If we're being entirely honest, even Teddy, I don't think was at fault here. Playtime, I think, was fine. Sponge was over-aggressive, but Rich got obliterated in the 1v1 on the top side, just was not able to survive. This is the weakness of Rich as a player. He's a good team fighter. He is an awful laner, and he's never gotten better in that stage. There are times where he can mask it a bit easier, but against his former organization here in Nongshim that he started his career off of, at least in League of Legends, he is just not able to survive. Kingen takes major advantage of Rich's weaknesses in that stage and is really able to kind of blast him back down to where we expected him to be in the top lane rankings, but again, DRX is just one of those teams where it's hard to project them because Yucal's good, but he's not like BDD levels of good, at least not right now. He kind of was in the winter split. I thought he was a borderline top 3, top 4 mid laner in the winter split, and I think it would be crazy to state otherwise. I see some people calling Yucal overrated right now. I think that's an insane thing to say, but Sponge is just a bottom tier jungler. You know, this bot lane has not been able to figure anything out. Top lane is not consistent at all. This is just not a deep roster. It's not a complete roster, and in the LCK, it's very difficult to have any sort of prolonged success if you don't have something to go off of regularly. I still think this team can be top 7 if everything goes right, but I think the top 6 streams are kind of gone, and right now they really are in the bottom 3, more so than they are in like the top 7, which is not ideal. But Nongshim, the clear number 5, worse than the top 4, better than everybody in the bottom 5. I really like where Nongshim is sitting right now. Again, their schedule gets harder and they're going to get more tested as this split goes along, but at least from what we've seen so far, I have a pretty good feeling that they're going to be able to make the most of it. Alright, but that is going to do it for my LCK Week 2 overview and analysis video here in the Spring Split. Up on the screen, the standings after 2 weeks of action. Of course, any ties are just broken alphabetically, but only one tie remains in terms of both series and game score. We're really starting to get a better idea of where these teams are sitting. Of course, schedules are pretty imbalanced at the start of this year, so you can cut a couple of teams some slack. You can kind of expect a bit of regression from others. We'll talk about that, but you can see that mostly in my personal power rankings, which is the first column to the right of every single team. Change is going to be how that has changed from last week to this week. We can go over risers and fallers. Top 4 for me is not going to move regardless of the results. Gen.G is clearly number 1, and HLE to me is clearly number 2. I think some people are going to want to put Dplus KIA above T1 after some performances this week. I don't believe that. I think T1 is a better team than Dplus KIA moving forward, and I think we do see some of the flaws with DK at the current moment. It's just how I expect it to be. If you think it's going to be different, let me know down in the comments. Obviously, I'm open to hearing hearing anybody's ideas. I'm very curious to know where people stand, but Nongshim very clearly at number 5. I expect that they're going to struggle a bit more moving forward. I don't expect this 3-1, like top 4 kind of record to last. I just don't think they have that kind of talent to be able to go up against the top 4 and be able to compete at that level, but I still think they're going to stay at level, or at power rank number 5, not at level 5, at power rank number 5, even with some of those losses, just depending on how it is. Don't be surprised to see this team fall in the standings and not change in the power rankings. Same thing for KT Rolster, except the opposite. They've had a really tough schedule at the start of this year. Hopefully they can start getting some easier games to get some momentum back on track, but there still is a lot to fix when it comes to this team. And then the only real change this week, the bottom 4. BFX is going to jump all the way up to number 7. This was the team that was number 10, not only at the start of winter, but throughout all of winter and at the start of spring. They had not moved from number 10 until the end of week number 1 of the spring split, and now they're all the way up to number 7. This definitely feels like the best of the rest right now at the bottom of the standings, which is not what I expected, but DRX is definitely lower than them. They dropped down to number 8, and Bro is definitely lower than both of them. They dropped down to number 9. Their only win is over DNF, who is very clearly the number 10 team in the LCK at the moment, and so that's the order I have the bottom 4 in. Again, let me know what you agree with or disagree with down in the comment section below. Always curious to know you guys' thoughts and opinions. Who am I overrating? Who am I underrating? You know, definitely interested to hear where you guys land on my takes, but let's go ahead and get into my player of the week and my dud of the week for week number 2. Player of the week was not a competition. It was Zeka, the mid laner for Hanwha Life Esports. There was no thought that had to go into this. Zeka was absolutely phenomenal in week number 2. You can see the games up on your screen now. You give him a melee assassin, he's going to take over the game. And again, I want to reiterate, people call him like a 1 or a 2 trick or even a playstyle trick, 1 trick. I don't agree with that in any capacity, because you take him and you put him on a Azir or Talia or one of those champions, he goes from being a top 2 or top 3 player in the world to a top 10 player in the world. I'd still take a top 10 player in the world in the mid lane. Like, that's the worst case scenario for Zeka, is that he's somewhere in the top 10. But again, on Akali, on Sylas, on Yone, he's a top 1, 2, or 3 player in the world. That's just how good he is on these champions. 15, 1, and 4 in game 3 against DNF, 8-0 and 6, and then 6-0 and 3 deathless in that series against T1. Just phenomenal stuff. He gapped Faker in that series. It was really fun to see, so he definitely deserves player of the week. And then my honorable mentions, Duro, the support for Gen.G. It really feels like he's finding his form at the exact right time, and he definitely deserves the honorable mention. He was the best player on Gen.G this week. And then Viper, the AD carry for Hanwha Life. HLE had a great week, and you had to represent 2 players here, so Viper's going to get an honorable mention. Duro will get an honorable mention, but Zeka is my player of the week. And then my dud of the week is unfortunately going to go to Bulldog, the mid laner for DNF. I'm just giving up on Bulldog at this point. You know how we talked about some players like Gideon having that upward trajectory, the upward momentum, getting better every single split? Bulldog has done the opposite. His graph is just a steady graph down, which is so unfortunate. He's gotten worse and worse the more he's played at the LCK level. Honestly, at this point, I do think you need to send him back down to the Challengers League just so that he can relearn how to be a selfish player, because that's when he was at his best. Now that he's playing this more facilitative style, it's not working for him, and so he's going to get dud of the week until he figures things out. And like I said, Zeka is player of the week, but that's going to do it. I do hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, leave a like. It really does mean a lot to me. It lets me know you guys are enjoying the content, and it does help get this video out to a lot more people, which I'm always very appreciative of. If you're new here, hit the subscribe button. Of course, we'll be covering the LCK every single week on this channel, but we cover all of the other major regions as well, so LTA North, LEC, and the LPL. We also cover the NACL every single week on this channel. That's tier 2 over in North America, so if you're interested in a comprehensive overview of everything going on in LoL Esports, this is the place for it. Hit subscribe and hit that bell so you can be notified when those videos do go live. But with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all